Hello everyone, Reginald Scott here and welcome to the video. So today's video is going to be all about the different group sets, Campagnolo, Shimano and SRAM. I'm going to shorten Campagnolo to Campy or Campag because it's just easier to say. So these are the top three main group sets that you're probably going to come across if you're getting into cycling, or if you're considering to buy a bike, or if you're considering to change your group set. I'm going to make this video today because I feel like a lot of the videos on YouTube concerning this subject don't really go into enough detail and don't really give all the information about these group sets that I think is pertinent or important. So this is going to be the definitive, the comprehensive video on a comparison of each one of these group sets for laymen, for people who are everyday people who are looking to, as I say, buy a bike or buy a group set. So I'm going to start with Campy, and just a bit of a background of me. Currently I'm a bike shop owner, so I do a lot of servicing on different bikes and I ride a lot of different customer bikes. I've owned several bikes over the years myself. I've been riding for 20 years on road bikes, so I've got good experience of Shimano, SRAM and Campagnolo. And this video is based on facts, but also my opinions as well. So I see the facts and then I obviously have my opinion based on those facts. Obviously, you're more than welcome to disagree. I'm sure many of you will. Just a word of warning, I am going to be critical of every single group set, and I'm going to be positive about every single group set. However, sometimes the critical side of it outweighs the positive, like the negatives outweigh the positives, and I will, at the end of this video, be concluding which group set I think is, or which brand of group sets is probably the best ones to go for. And I know that particularly Campy fans or Campag fans can be pretty die-hard about their love of that particular brand, and they don't take criticism very well. So if you are a Campy fanboy, be warned, you're probably not going to like this video because I'm going to say some negative things about your beloved group set. To the rest of you, the SRAM and the Shimano people, you're probably more likely to take constructive criticism better, but I'm sure I might get a bit of backlash against you guys as well. I'm going to announce my bias. Firstly, yes, I do run a bike shop, so obviously I sell a particular brand in the bike shop. That brand happens to be Shimano. But hopefully that doesn't make you think that I'm just going to be pro Shimano the whole way. I am going to be negative about Shimano as well, and I won't be necessarily concluding that Shimano is the best. So please watch the video and you'll hear all the evidence and all the facts. Let's start with Campag. I'm going to start with the positives about Campag. So Campag is an Italian brand. Campagnolo is an Italian brand. I'm actually half Italian. Half my family is from Italy. My mother was Italian. As you can see, I speak with my hands. And obviously, you know, anything related to Italy, you know, I have a love for, generally speaking. Doesn't necessarily apply with group sets. But one of the positives to start off with of Campagnolo is its history. So Campagnolo is very, very famous for its prestigious history. And this can be seen as a positive reason to buy the group set. If you're a lover of history and the roots of particular brands, you might have a respect for Campagnolo, and therefore, you know, that could be a positive. That could be a positive reason for buying that brand. Even if that brand necessarily isn't better than the other brands, technology-wise or user-friendliness-wise or whatever, you might feel that the history matters more than that. And some people are like that. I'm kind of a little bit like that myself with certain things that I buy. I like to know there's a story behind it. I like to know there's a history behind it. And, you know, for me, that matters. So, yeah, for those people out there who love history and, you know, they respect the brand because of that history, this is a positive for Campag. So a little bit about Campag's history. They were the first people to develop technologies such as the quick release, which pretty much everybody uses now. I know we're moving into disc brakes now with through axles, but let's face it, quick releases have been around for a long time now, and they are an awesome bit of technology. You get them on pretty much every bike now. And they also invented the rear derailleur, the proper derailleur system. The guy who who ran the company, name below. He basically used to race, and he found, he developed these technologies because he was struggling with racing, and he was getting sick and tired of having to change wheels and stuff like that whilst out racing, in order to switch the gears, because in the old days you used to have two different gears on your back wheel on either side. You had your flat road gear and your climbing gear, and you would have to take your wheel out the back of the bike, switch it around, put it back in the bike. And so he developed the quick release, because in the old days they used to have nuts and bolts, so they had to carry spanners with them, and they had to do this during a race. So during the race they'd get off the bike when they got to the mountain, they'd get the spanners out, they'd dismantle the bike, take the back wheel out, flip it around to the bigger gear, put it back in the bike, which is mad, absolutely mad. And then they would obviously have to adjust the length of where you position the wheel so that the chain wouldn't be slack. It's incredible to even consider it. So this is why those technologies were developed by Campagnolo. So yeah, great history. So one positive there. Then another thing that Campag fans talk about a lot is the quality of the brand. So it's known to be a very high quality brand. So their engineering is very, very precise. When you get a piece of Campagnolo equipment, it can be very, very precision made. The quality is very, very fine, and they do use very fine quality materials as well, like the quality of the aluminiums and the carbon fibers and stuff that they use is very, very good. It's got that kind of built to last feel to it. It doesn't tend to rust very easily. It's very, very hard wearing as a group set. I've had a set of Campagnolo record myself, actually. I had it on a previous bike that I owned, and it was very well built. I mean, a couple of the rubber pads from the inside of the triggers, so these things here, this is Shimano, but a couple of the rubber pads that was on the inside where the two, the brake lever and the shifter touched, they came off, and the surface coating on the carbon fiber on the trigger, that came off as well on my group set. So build quality is good, but there are a few minor issues that you will get with a Campy group set, but generally speaking it's recognized as being a very high quality, well built group set. The looks is another positive. So positive number 3 for Campag is the looks. This is very much down to the individual. Personally, after I had a set of Campagnolo, when I first bought it, I liked the looks. Then after using it, my opinion about the group set changed quite radically, and then I started to hate the way it looked. So looks is very, I don't know, down to the individual's preference. Some could argue that Campagnolo looks better than the other group sets, but I don't really see it nowadays. I don't think there's much difference to differentiate between them, but yeah, some people do see that as a positive. The looks of Campagnolo is a big positive. It's something mentioned a lot of the time when people discuss the Campagnolo group set. So there you go, I put it down as a positive, the style, if you like, of the group set. Another positive is the status. So one of the biggest selling factors of Campagnolo is not necessarily the design or the way that the group set functions or any particular aspect of the group set. It's just the status. So the status of the brand. It's about the brand name. It's about what it means to have that group set, because it's quite a high-end price range to buy Campagnolo. The entrance point financially to get into the Campagnolo club is significantly higher than other brands. It carries a certain weight, a certain status. So when you turn up to a group ride, for example, with a nice Campagnolo group set, people will go, ooh, look at him. It's a bit like difference between iPhone and Android. Nothing wrong with Android. In fact, some Android devices are probably better than iPhone, but iPhone carries that status, right? It's a status symbol. So all the girls on Instagram, when they're taking photos of themselves, they're all using an iPhone because it's just a status symbol. It's, look at me, I've got the best phone. Whether it is or is not the best phone is up for argument, but it's about the branding, it's about status. So that's another positive of Campy. If you're the kind of person who likes to show off and to show your wealth, or perhaps to, you know, just to look good, you know, if you're going to put Campagnolo on your bike and then hang your bike on the wall and take photographs of it for Instagram, then probably Campag is the way to go. And then finally, repair and maintenance. Well, actually just repair. So one of the big positives of Campag, I've just thought of another one actually. One of the big positives of Campag is supposedly that you can repair the parts. I personally have never repaired any, but I know it's one thing that a lot of users of Campagnolo boast about, is that when their components wear out, they can buy like the ratchets, for example, that govern the little shifting system in their levers. They can replace those ratchets and continue to use that group set. I've just thought of another positive, which I'm going to note down now. I have to change the score for Campy now. So I just had to change the score there and also add something I remembered. When you're shifting up with all the group sets, Campy, Shimano, SRAM, if you push the lever multiple times, like in a big sweeping motion, all of those group sets will shift up quickly, so you can get to an easier gear for climbing very, very fast. But whereas SRAM and Shimano, it's click up and then single click down, so you can do multiple clicks up, but then each click down is a single click. With Campagnolo, the lever that they use, and I will picture it now. The lever that they use is a multi-shift lever, so you can actually shift from the biggest gear all the way down to the smallest gear in one sweep, if that's what you want to do. So potentially that could be seen as an advantage. So as I see it, those are all the positives of Campag. Now moving on to the negatives. In the positive section, I put down score of 6 because there were 6 positives that I could think of that I thought were relevant or pertinent to the video. Now, on to the negatives. First negative is price. As I mentioned before, Campagnolo is significantly more expensive than the competition, which means that basically if you want their group sets, you're going to have to pay for it, and you have to pay considerably more, as I say, than Shimano and SRAM to get those group sets. So I see that as a bit of a negative. The price is a lot higher. Not just that, but if you want to then buy the spare parts, or you want to replace the chains, or you want to replace the cassettes, those are all more expensive as well. So that is a bit of a negative. On the function of the group set, I also put that down as a bit of a negative. Now, personally, and I know I've spoken to a couple of other people who've used Campagnolo in the past and switched back to Shimano, myself, and also people I've watched their reviews on YouTube of Campagnolo, and one guy I watched, he was actually sponsored by Campagnolo, but he hinted that he didn't like the shifting system, but he couldn't really say it, obviously because he was sponsored. But a lot of people find this issue. So if you've gone from SRAM or Shimano and you switch to Campag, you'll find a few difficulties in the shifting system. So the first thing is that the shifting is quite stiff. It's quite hard to shift up and down with the Campag system. And also, if you, instead of having just 2 levers or a single lever here on where the brake is, like Shimano or like SRAM, SRAM has a single lever here that does both up and down, and Shimano has 2 levers both here that works up and down. As I say, Campag has an internal lever that sort of sits on the side of the hood. Now that lever for me is a bit of a problem. Ergonomically it's a problem because it means that you're restricted to where you can put your hands when you're resting and riding. I found that quite awkward, that it would force me to put my thumbs on top of those shift levers, and that was pretty much the only place I could comfortably put my hand. If I wrapped my thumb around the other side of the lever, I was worried about if I had to brake or something that, you know, my thumb would then push into the underside of that lever, or that if I hit something or crashed, that it would snap off my thumb or break my thumb or something like that. So you're kind of forced to put your hand into a restricted position as a result of where that side lever comes out. As I say, I'll show photos. And then that side lever itself is a problem. If you're in the drops and you're trying to sprint in the drops, or you're getting ready to sprint in the drops, or you're descending in the drops, for example, that thumb lever is supposed to help you shift down to a harder gear. It's really hard to reach when you're in the drop, because basically, unless you've got extraordinarily long thumbs, basically just the tip of your thumb sits on that lever, and the amount of pressure, the amount of poundage you have to put in to get that lever to shift is quite a lot. It's a lot stiffer than, say, Shimano, which is really, really light. Like, I can shift Shimano with one finger really easily. Like, it's not actually difficult. I can even shift it with my small finger, look. Like, it's so easy. Like I say, the poundage on the Campy system is a lot stiffer, a lot harder. So what you'll tend to find happens, and I found this a few times, is you can't really shift quickly with Campagnolo down, because if you just want one gear, you're trying to press that lever and it's really stiff, and then there's a risk as well. You can't just click it. Like with Shimano, it doesn't matter how hard I press that lever, I'm only going to get one gear. Whereas with the Campy stuff, because you can shift down the entire stack in one go, what tends to happen is, say you're in the 13th cog, you're in a fast group, you know, you've got people either side of you, and you're going along really quick, and you want to shift from the 13th down to the 12th, for example. Or you're in the 14th and you want to shift down to the 13th, right? You'll press on that lever, you'll press. Eventually the lever will break, like the trigger on a gun, you've got the breaking point. But because you've been pressing so hard, you'll kind of overpress the lever, and instead of shifting one gear, you'll shift 3 or 2. And then you'll get a gear that you really didn't want. So your legs were prepared or spinning out on the 14th gear, so you wanted to shift to 13. Well, instead of shifting 13, you shift to 11. It's way too difficult for you too soon, and you end up out the back of the group, because you're then chaotically trying to shift back up. It used to happen to me all the time, and I could never quite get used to it. It's a lot easier when your hand is on top of the hood, because you've got that down weight of your thumb, you know, you've got the mechanical advantage, you can more easily shift, and so you cock up less. But when you're in the drops, you cock up all the time when you're trying to shift that lever. And a lot of people say this, it's not just me, a lot of people say that shift lever is very stiff and awkward to use. So ergonomically, I would say that the Campag system is inferior to the other group sets. So that's a big negative for me, although it only gets one negative point for that. Maintenance. Now, I talked about repair earlier. Maintenance is an issue. Now, if a group set is of decent quality, I don't think you're going to need to do that many repairs to it over the years. For example, I have a group set which is Shimano 600. I'll show you a picture of it. It's the best group set I've ever had for shifting, for ergonomics, for smoothness, for everything. It's a beautiful, beautiful group set. It works so well. And I've had that group set for, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, 18, maybe even 19 years. I've had that group set now. I got it in 2001. What's that? Yeah, that's like 19 years, okay? So that's a very old group set, and I used to use that group set pretty much every day in the UK, both summer and winter riding, both commuting and racing. And I also used that group set here in Brunei in very high humidity here in Southeast Asia. And now I gave the bike with that group set on it to my nephew while he was waiting for his new bike. And then that bike now is ridden by my assistant, both of them, who told me that that group set is the smoothest shifting group set they've ever used. And that group set has never been repaired. It's never put a foot wrong in 19 years. And it still shifts beautifully. And I've never done any maintenance to the internal workings of the STI levers. They've never been taken apart, they've never been cleaned as such. Like, I've sprayed some WD in there every now and again, but they've never rusted. There's no rust at all on the entire group set. It's a beautiful, beautiful group set. So what I'm trying to say is that Shimano, and a lot of Campag people have kind of a bit of a, what's the word, they look down on Shimano because they see it as cheap and rubbish and not very well built. Well, if that's the case, I kind of think that my group set, my Ultegra 600, kind of disproves that theory, that you can get Shimano group sets that last for decades and never need repairing. So for me, you don't really, the fact that you can repair Campag is not necessarily an advantage, because if it's well made, you shouldn't need to repair it that often, right? But the point is that maintenance is difficult, because with Campag, are you going to be able to get the parts? It's not a very popular group set. The parts are expensive, and the getting those parts is more difficult because they're less widely available, right? So, for example, here in Brunei, hardly anybody uses Campag. Most people are on SRAM or Shimano. So if you go to a local bike shop trying to find, say, a cassette or a ratchet from inside of your shifter, or anything, even the wires, the cables, because they're different from the other two group sets, you're not going to find them here. You're going to have to order them online and wait several days, maybe even weeks, to get those parts. So maintenance is a real problem for Campagnolo. And issue number 4 that I have as well is bike shops. So you have to go to a Campagnolo specific bike shop. Most bike shops, your average bike shops, including my bike shop, don't have the tools. I have some of the tools, but I don't have all the tools for Campagnolo, because I just don't have any customers that use those kind of bikes. Use that group set. Hardly any of my customers. I would say less than 1% of my customer base uses Campagnolo. So there's no financial point for me to get those tools as a bike shop. Those bike shops are extremely expensive. Back to maintenance. If you want to maintain your own bike at home, Campagnolo tools are significantly more expensive than Shimano tools. And so you're going to be spending more money, or you're going to have to find a different bike shop, because like I say, you can't just take your Campagnolo bike into any old mainstream bike shop, because they're probably not going to have those tools. So yeah, maintenance and bike shops is more difficult for you, and then the general cost of maintenance. Then we come on to sound. The shifting on Campagnolo, it sounds very industrial and quite, in my opinion, quite unpleasant. It's got a very clunky sound to it. This is touted as an advantage of Campagnolo. A lot of Campy guys will say, oh, you know, Campagnolo has this great sound. It's really loud, so you know you've shifted gear. I think that's a pretty daft thing to say, because number one, when I shift on Shimano, it's very, very smooth. It makes very little sound. I know I've shifted because I can feel the resistance in my legs. You know, I know that I've gone up a gear or down a gear based on the resistance in my legs. The only reason I would need the group set to be louder to tell me that I've shifted is if the group set was unreliable and I needed that audible confirmation that I've shifted gears. Because when I click the button, I expect this to work every time, and it does without fail. My Shimano works every single time. So if you're telling me as a Campag guy, oh yeah, I like the really loud sound that Campag makes, that very industrial, clunky, rattly sound, because it tells me I've shifted gear. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with your gear system that you need that sound? You know, can you imagine in a car if every time you change gear there was like an audible clang? it would be really bad, right? Especially an automatic car. Just imagine that every time it changes gear it goes clong, clang. No, that's not an advantage. That's definitely a disadvantage. I'll tell you why it's a disadvantage before you say, well, okay, it's just a weird noise, right? Who cares? It's a disadvantage in racing. In racing, I like quiet hubs and I like quiet gears for several reasons. Number one, when you're chasing down someone who's on a breakaway, for example, you want to be as quiet coming up to them as possible because you want to get the drop on them, right? So you don't want to clue them into the fact that you've caught up with them and you're on their tail, so that then you can maybe sprint past them or go past them. And also when you're coming into the final few hundred meters of the race, or the last few kilometers of the race, and you're getting ready to sprint, you want a quiet group set that when you're in the pack you can shift gears, kind of get yourself ready to sprint without letting everybody in the pack know that you're doing that. Now obviously you can still hear Shimano gear shift, but it's smaller sound, it's less sound, so you've got a greater chance of basically getting the drop on people and doing things incognito. If in a clandestine kind of way, if you've got that Campag group set and you shift down, it's going to go clunk, clang, clunk, clang, and everybody's going to know that you're shifting down, and everyone's going to be keeping an eye on you because like, right, he's shifting down. Why is he shifting down? Is he going to go for the sprint? Is he going to go for the KOM? Is he going to go for the the final finish line? And everybody's now attention on you, or they know you're there and they remembered you, right? You can't just sneak past them. So the sound for me is a major disadvantage if you're racing, all right? And then finally, the sixth negative point about Campagnolo is the weight. It's the heaviest group set. So you take any of their group sets, or let's take their top of the range group set and compare it against the top of the range Shimano, top of the range SRAM. It's heavier than Shimano and it's significantly heavier than SRAM, SRAM being the lightest. So those are the 6 negatives, and there were 6 positives. So when I deduct the negatives from the positives, I get a score of 0 for Campy. So it's kind of neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It depends who you are and what matters to you, I guess. Who would I recommend Campy for? I'd recommend it for older riders, people who are less interested in racing, people who value, perhaps quality over functionality, and like people who don't have to go anywhere quickly. It's not really the kind of group set that you need to buy if you want to race and you're serious about your racing. You could actually get away with buying some of the cheaper Campagnolo group sets if you're building up a touring bike. Touring riders, Campag would be good for because you've got that reliability. Having said that, if you're doing a trek across the world on a touring bike and something breaks, even if it's just a cable, you've got to carry all those cables and all those spares with you, because as I say, most bike shops around the world, if you're say cycling across Asia and you stop by in a bike shop in the Philippines, for example, it's highly unlikely they're going to have Campagnolo stuff in there. Highly unlikely. So touring, yes, but maybe bike trekking, no. So yeah, personally, I can't see any good reason to buy Campagnolo other than you just bought it for the status and the history. Because the other pros of the group set are kind of outweighed by the negatives. So that was Campag. Right, moving on to Shimano. So advantages of Shimano. Advantage number 1 is the price. Shimano is the cheapest, and that's great. Because if you're racing and you crash and you break something, it's going to be cheap to replace. If something eventually does break on your group set, which Shimano, if you look after it, is very, very reliable from what I've found. Like I say, I've got a 15, 16-year-old group set, 6600 Ultegra, and it's still going strong. Honestly, that group set is amazing. I just, just can't say enough good things about it. So, if something eventually does break, it's going to be cheap to replace, and it's cheap to get hold of. And also they have a lower entry point. Like Campag, their entry point to their group sets, even their low range group set, is quite high, like in price, whereas Shimano have a few more group sets below that. Like they start around Tawny and what's the other one, Sora and Tiagra. So you start really low with Shimano. Like their basic group set is like, I don't know, a couple of hundred dollars or a couple of £100 will get you a really cheap Shimano group set. So if you're buying a really cheap bike, just to ride to work, or you don't have much money and you need to just get a bike to enjoy the sport of cycling, it's probably most likely to have a Shimano group set on it because they're the cheapest ones. So that's great. That's really great. Then reliability as number 2 point. I've already kind of talked about this. Shimano mechanically is very, very reliable. It's Japanese, it kind of just works, and it works really smoothly as well. Number 3, user friendliness. It's very, very user friendly. Shimano is quite uncomplicated. It's, as your first group set, it's quite easy to maintain yourself at home. Whether it be for like home mechanics, it's very easy, or to get the tools for it is really easy, and it's all pretty much standard stuff. So yeah, it's very, very user friendly, and also the shifting on it is super user friendly as well. It's very, very smooth shifting, and it's very, very soft. You don't have to be very strong to use it, so it's great for people with weaker hands, or women, or everybody basically. It doesn't discriminate. It's not going to be difficult to use. It's easy to get parts for. Point number 4 that I've got here, easy to get parts for. So yeah, if you go to any bike shop around the world, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can get Shimano parts. Everybody in the world has Shimano parts. Most of the pro teams are using Shimano, most of the racers out there are using Shimano, most of everybody pretty much is using Shimano. And a lot of their stuff is cross-compatible as well. So that's awesome. You know, great ease of use, user-friendly, easy to get parts, just no nonsense basically. It's very good design. Like Shimano has actually very good design. Their BB standard, the BB86, their 24mm spindle, their lever system, everything about Shimano is fantastically well designed, and it's probably the best from some perspectives out there on the market, especially the 24mm spindle, and the bearings that they use it with are very reliable. The bearings last a good long time, and yeah, it's just a great system, and it's compatible, as I say, with a lot of bikes out there on the market as well. If you buy like a mainstream bike like a Giant or a Scott, or I don't know what else, a Merida, or you know, all the big sort of big name brands out there, it will work with Shimano. It'll be compatible with Shimano. It'll probably even come with a Shimano Groupset and BB already attached to the bike. So that's another great thing. So very well designed. And then variety. They produce a huge variety of stuff. So they've got road group sets in both rim brake and disc brake. They've got electronic group sets. They've got group sets for mountain bikes, they've got group sets for road bikes, they've got group sets for gravel bikes, and they've got group sets for town bikes. So there's a huge variety of different derailleur sizes, different braking systems, different gear ratios. They are fantastically good at that huge variety of stuff. So whatever kind of cycling that you're into, whatever your niche is, you can probably either cobble together something, you know, that suits exactly your purposes, whatever those purposes are, or Shimano probably already have a group set specifically designed for you. Everything from their, you know, their gravel group sets that have got a clutch on the derailleur to stop chain slap, all the way to, you know, hydraulic disc brake road bike group sets. So it's all awesome stuff, huge variety. So I've got 6 positives for Shimano. And then moving on to the negatives for Shimano, we've got crank issues. Now, crank issues relates to this group set here, which is the, well, it relates to all the group sets now, actually. So this is the 6800 Shimano group set, and it's not the best Shimano group set I've ever had. The 6600 was way better. This is Ultegra, by the way. And the big issue with these group sets is twofold. Number one, there's a lot of stuff out there online right now of the aluminium crank arms on these group sets snapping off. I'll show you some pictures right now. So that's happening with the Shimano stuff, and specifically the Ultegra and the Dura Ace of the same time period. The 6800 time period. The modern stuff, the new R8000 stuff, they don't appear to be breaking as frequently, but I can't confirm that. All I know is that all the stuff online and all the stuff that I've seen breaking is the previous iteration of the Shimano group sets. So they do seem to have recently a big issue with aluminium crank arms snapping off. Now that is a big problem, that's a big deal, because if you break an aluminium crank arm while you're riding, especially if you're sprinting, you can die, because you'll go flying off the bike. Whichever side the crank arm breaks, you'll fall to that side. So you may fall into traffic, and you may fall in front of a car or a truck, and then you're dead. So that is a really big, serious situation. Like I say, I think they may have solved that issue now, but it is something to be wary of, that if you don't maintain those crank arms well, or if there is a fault in the manufacture of those aluminium crank arms, they will snap. Another issue of the newer crank arms for Shimano is they paint everything now. Everything is kind of anodized, painted black. This one is kind of a gunmetal grey colour, or dark grey. But all the newer group sets, like the newer Dura Ace and things, 9100, is all black, and it's, in my opinion, it's really ugly, But what matters more than the aesthetics is the fact that as your foot rubs against the side of the crank, which happens with most of the people I know, most of the customers I know have this issue, and some of them have a really bad issue with it, and I keep telling them to like adjust their cleat position, try and move their heel away from their crank, because some of them are actually cutting through their aluminium cranks by rubbing against it, and that's really bad. But even if, like me, you rub lightly against it, I'll show you the damage now. So this is an issue with the newer the newer Shimano stuff. It's all grey and black painted, and so it just wears out, and it looks rubbish after a short period of time. So that is a big issue with the newer stuff that the older stuff just didn't have. It basically wears off that colour. Now on the old group sets that were silver, it didn't matter. So you could rub against the silver ones as much as you like and you would never see a mark or any significant mark to the side of your silver group set. Now they're painting everything black to be in keeping with the trends now, which is everybody wants everything black for some reason. It shows up. So the moment you wear a little bit of your crank arm with Shimano, it's going to look ugly and just not very nice. So yeah, I see that as a big crank issue. That was a really big negative for Shimano. Next is quality drop. Shimano has come down in quality, and it's illustrated by the group set behind me. So number one is they used to all be silver group sets, now they're coloured, and so in my opinion that's a quality issue with the fact that the colour rubs off really easily. Number two is rusting. I have no rust on my 15-20 year old Ultegra group set. On this group set, which is barely 3 years old, I've got rust. I've got rust on the inside of the shifters with the mechanism here. That never used to happen with Shimano. It's happening very frequently, and it also happens with the newer group sets like the R8000 Ultegra. I've noticed a lot of rusting issues. I've noticed even rusting issues on the Dura-Ace and corrosion issues on the Dura-Ace front derailleurs for the new group sets. So it's a big deal for me because I'm like, you're paying what, $1,000 for an Ultegra group set and maybe $2,000 for a Dura-Ace, and it's rusting on you. That's not good. You know, you want that to last because you paid a lot of money for it, or at least I do, unless you're super rich and it doesn't matter to you. If you're super rich, you would just buy the Campy, right? So, so it's a big deal. Like, there's a definite significant quality drop in the group sets. Another issue with the R8000 group set and the newer Shimano group set is the barrel adjuster is a piece of crap. It doesn't work. This one on the 6800 actually works, and it's the traditional barrel adjuster for the rear derailleur I'm talking about. The new one on the R8000 is a piece of crap. It doesn't work very well. And also the brakes as well. I noticed a lot of my customers that bought the R8000, when you open that little switch on the brake caliper to let your back wheel out or let your front wheel out, a lot of those switches on the R8000 are broken and they won't open. And when I investigate, because I'm a bike mechanic, so it's my job to do that, and I open them up, basically inside you've got a spring and a ball, like a ball bearing, in a groove. And the idea was that as you turn that lever, that spring compressed and the ball bearing popped out of its little hole and allowed you to open the caliper. And then when you turn that switch back, the ball returns and pops back in the hole and kind of locks it in place. And that's the same design as on these 6800. But the difference is now the newer ones have a little plastic insert inside. And that is a very, very thin piece of plastic. And I honestly don't know why they designed it like this. It drives me nuts. But that little piece of plastic, if I can find a photo of it, I'll show you. That little piece of plastic just breaks. After maybe 4 to 5 months of use, if you're taking your wheel out regularly from the back of the bike to get it in your car or something to go to the group ride or whatever, it snaps. That little piece of plastic gets snapped, then that trigger, that little lever gets jammed, and you can't take your wheel out the back of your bike anymore. And I've had to open up that lever, remove that little plastic shim that lives in there, spray it full of lube, and you know, put it back together again, and then it works, but it's stiff. It's really hard to do, but at least then it starts functioning again. And I find they get full of grit as well, especially on the rear brake. So basically, just across the board, there's a significant quality drop. in the Shimano products recently that I've seen, and a lot of the stuff is breaking where it really shouldn't be. Like I say, the group set that I have that's nearly 20 years old, it still works perfectly. There's no issue with it whatsoever. I just can't believe that Shimano are doing this and allowing this to happen. And it's not just like, we're a small bike shop here in Brunei. Brunei is a small country. We have less than 1 million people. And I'm seeing this occurring multiple times. Multiple customers with broken rear releases for their rear brakes. Multiple customers with rusty shifters. Multiple customers with all these issues. So it's like, it's not just a one-off. It's a serious problem that Shimano have right now. So yeah, big quality drop, big problem. Number 3 I've got for Shimano is it's boring. Everybody has it, right? So if you have the Campy or if you have the SRAM, you'll be a bit different, you'll be a bit unique, you'll be a bit special. People will want to have a look at your group set maybe when you turn up for the ride. If you turn up on Shimano Ultegra, everybody's got Shimano Ultegra. It's boring as hell. It's like owning, if you're in Europe, it's like driving a Ford. Sorry, if you're in America, it's like driving a Ford, or if you're in Europe, driving a Vauxhall or an Opel, or if you're in Brunei, driving a Toyota. It's boring. Everybody has that car. Yawn, get some originality, get some, some style, because Shimano doesn't really have that. So yeah, boring, boring, boring. And then another negative of Shimano is the Di2 system. The Di2, two stupid things about it. Number 1 is the battery system for Di2 is stored in like awkward places, like inside your seat post or inside your handlebar, or screwed to the bottom of your frame. And it's awkward because those batteries do die. I've had a few customers that have got Di2 batteries that have died after a short period of time, and they cost like $300 to replace, and they're hard to get hold of. So if you've got one in your seat post, you've got to remove your seat post, measure where your seat post was, and then remove that seat post and find that battery and disconnect it, and then get a new one. So it's a bit of a pain in the ass. And also the other annoying thing about Shimano is the wires. Like, an electronic group set for me has virtually no advantage over mechanical. It's significantly more expensive. It's worse when it goes wrong, both cost and also you've got to find somebody who knows how to fix it, and a lot of the time it's not fixable. You just have to replace the parts, which again costs you more. And it also comes with wires, and wires are pretty dumb. Like, I used to work in robotics, and we had like $1 million robotic systems that we had to look after, and when they shut down and stopped, a lot of the time it was the wiring that was a problem. Either wires burn out or they get chewed through by mice. I'm not saying that's going to happen with your Dura-Ace Di2 or your Ultegra Di2, but one of the issues is that if you have those wires going into your group set, those wires can get damaged or pulled out quite easily because they're very, very thin. And another issue is you've got to put them through your bike, because if you've got internal cable routing on your bike and you want to run an electronic group set with Shimano, you still have to do all that annoying wiring, getting that wire to fit snugly under your bottom bracket shell and all this kind of thing. So they're a pain in the ass to install. And then when you want to switch that system over to another bike, you've got to pay a mechanic or spend many hours yourself pulling out your BB just to get at those fiddly little wires to get them back through the bike. So they're a pain in the ass, and it's a really, in my opinion, it's a bad system. I'll get on to other systems later on that I think are better. So I put that down as a negative. And then finally, we come to the final negative of Shimano. They're not really cutting edge. They're very slow to develop. Like, they're still using 11-speed, whereas both Campy and SRAM have now come out with 12-speed group sets. As I say, their electronic group set, in my opinion, is a little bit archaic. Still using wires. We're in the realm of wireless technology now. Everything is wireless. My mini speaker for my phone is wireless. My internet is wireless. Why would I need wires on my group set? Why can't we have Bluetooth or some other system that enables me to have wireless electronic shifting? I think it's dumb. So yeah, they're slow to develop. It's a trait of Japanese companies. I used to work with a Japanese company, and they were very, very slow to take on new ideas. They were a cutting edge technology company, but they would always be the last to the party. Like, we dealt with robotics. It was Panasonic that I used to work with, and Panasonic make amazing stuff. Their stuff is really high quality and probably the best in the world, but they're slower than everybody else. So the other manufacturers who are making robots were coming out with laser welding before Panasonic. They were coming out with all these really cool adaptations to the robot systems, and it would take Panasonic maybe 1 or 2 years to catch up. When they eventually did come out with it, it was the best, and it was really, really well refined, and I guess that's an advantage in some respect. Unfortunately, you're not seeing that with Shimano. Shimano are taking a long time to come out with stuff, and then when they do come out with it, the quality maybe is not quite as good, or the concept is maybe not quite as good as the other brands. So yeah, I would put that down as a disadvantage. So when I deduct disadvantages from the advantages for Shimano, I get a score of +1. So there is actually a positive to buying Shimano. I think the positives do outweigh, only ever so slightly, the negatives. So yeah, I can recommend them as a group set. I love them, I think they're great, but I may be shifting my opinion now with the quality issues as a result of that. So now let's move on finally to SRAM. So SRAM is the newest kid on the block. They're an American company, although a lot of their engineering is done in Germany as well. So they are, very innovative, and that's number one for SRAM. I would say they're the most innovative brand out there right now. Their technology is really awesome, and they're coming up with new ideas all the time, like their 12-speed group set, the new SRAM Access group set is just absolutely incredible looking. Just the technology and the ideas that SRAM are coming up with is awesome. So if you like innovative technology, if you like to be on the cutting edge, I think SRAM is the group set to go for right now. Next positive is they are compatible with Shimano. So you can actually run a SRAM chain on a Shimano group set, or you can run a SRAM cassette on a Shimano group set, or you can run, I've seen even people running like certain shifters and things that mix and match all the cables as well for like the gears and the brakes, both the same for Shimano and SRAM, and the tools as well. So if you're a home mechanic and you've got all the tools for your Shimano bike, and then you're wondering about getting a SRAM bike as well, don't worry, all your tools that work on Shimano are going to work on SRAM as well. So that's a huge advantage, whereas if you go buy a Campag bike, you're going to have to buy all new tools. So the compatibility cannot be understated. The fact that it's compatible with Shimano, which is the most popular group set out there, is a huge advantage. Right down to putting a cassette on your wheels. If you've got Shimano hubs on your wheels, you can put on a SRAM cassette. Whereas again, with Campy, you cannot fit a Campy cassette to a Shimano wheel set. You're going to have to get yourself a new hub. So there you go. That's really awesome. Lightweight. SRAM is the very lightest group set you can buy. They are significantly lighter than the competition. They're lighter than Shimano and a lot lighter than Campy. And if lightness matters to you, as it does to me, then they are very, very desirable. I've seen bikes, kitted out with like SRAM Force, and I've been shocked at like what the final weight of the bike comes out as. And SRAM Force is, what would that be? It's like your Ultegra, I think. It's about the level of Ultegra, maybe a bit less, but and then above that you've got your Red 22 and all your other high-end SRAM group sets. But basically everything SRAM is lighter, pretty much, and that's awesome. So we like that. Going back to innovativeness as well, the SRAM Access group set, not the Access, the Apex, sorry, the SRAM Apex group set, which is the cheapest one they make. It's kind of a bit lower than 105. That comes with a 1x system. So if you're building a gravel bike and you want a cheap group set, you can have a 1x gravel bike group set, which is awesome. And they have the biggest climbing gears as well available for that very low-end group set, so that's pretty awesome as well. They're very innovative. I like the fact they came out with that. It's pretty awesome. Let's see now, easy to use. Yeah, SRAM's easy to use. Like, it's got one lever to control everything, one ring to rule them all. SRAM just has like a single lever here. You do a small click to go down, or one long click to go up, or a really long sweep to go up multiple gears. So it's just little click down, big click up. It's super simple, very easy to get used to. If you're switching from Shimano, you won't have any trouble at all. It'll take you about a few days to get used to it, and then you'll be clicking away quite happily. So it's a great group set in that respect, nice and easy to use. And again, because all the tools and all the components are very similar to very similar to Shimano, you won't have any trouble with it if you're a home mechanic. It looks good. I think the newer stuff looks really nice, especially the, as I say, the latest 12-speed group set looks really awesome. Very desirable. They use carbon cranks, and their carbon cranks are very resilient as well. It looks great. SRAM looks good. I mean, it's a little bit Germanic in the way it looks, but I think it looks nice, especially the SRAM Red 22 caliper brakes. I think they look really nice. The black and silver effect looks good. So great looks. And then finally, for my final advantage, is the ETAP system. So the ETAP has, is an electronic shifting system, just like the Campy, is it EPS or ESP? I forget now. I have very little experience of it. And the Shimano Di2. What's awesome about the ETAP is it's wireless, and I think it's the best system. So with the ETAP's really cool as well. The way the triggers work on ETAP, so you push both in at the same time to shift the front derailleur, and the back you just press like one at a time. It's super cool. I think it's such a great system. It's super easy to set up as well, like from a bike mechanic perspective, it's really easy to set up. And once it's set up, it's super reliable as well. And because you've got individual batteries attached to each, the front derailleur, the rear derailleur, and individual batteries inside the shifters, replacing the batteries is super easy, and charging the batteries is super easy as well. So I love it. I think it's a really, if you look at electronic group sets, I mean, I'm not in general a big fan of electronic group sets. I would rather have mechanical. But if you are a fan of electronic, go for SRAM, because it's the best one, really. It's also easier to connect to other devices. Because it's wireless, the connectivity to other devices is super easy with SRAM ETAP. So go for that. So that's 6 advantages for SRAM, and now we'll get on to the disadvantages of SRAM. First one is jockey wheels. Very common complaint with a lot of SRAM group sets, no matter which group set you buy, the jockey wheels just break. Don't know why. You'll see splits in them, right down the plastic, right down to the bearing. This potentially could be very dangerous if the jockey wheel continues to split and falls off while you're riding. Your chain could get jammed in your rear derailleur and you could have an accident. So that's not good, and as I say, I've noticed that. Thankfully, jockey wheels are very cheap, so what I would recommend is you, if you notice them that they've cracked, just when you're cleaning the bike, just check them out. If you see any cracks in them, get them replaced. I replaced them with BBB jockey wheels, which are standard. They're not expensive and they're very good and very reliable. So it's not a big deal, but it is a disadvantage. It shows the lack of quality control with their jockey wheels, which is a bit disappointing. Next is the GXP system, which is one of the types of BB system and spindle system that SRAM use. There's a lot of problems with it. Getting the tension on that spindle is quite difficult when you're maintaining the bikes and when you're installing the bikes. You have to mess around with a lot of washers and a lot of springs and wave washers and things to try and get the crank to not wobble or to stay loaded correctly into the bottom bracket of the bike. The other issue with that is that if you put too many washers in, or too many spring washers, you can put too much side pressure on the crank and you wear out your bearings faster. So that is a bit of a pain in the ass, and it only uses a single bolt as well to attach into all of their cranks, which sometimes if a bike shop has over tightened that bolt, it can be really difficult to undo that bolt. The Shimano system is much easier to undo than the SRAM system when that bolt's been incorrectly installed. You need a lot of force on it. It takes something like 40 to 50 something Newton meters as well, whereas the SRAM system only takes 12 to 14 Newton meters. So there's a big difference with the amount of force that you need to put through that crank system. And I've also noticed that they're not as precisely made or engineered as Campy or Shimano, in the sense that when the bearing fit to the spindle is not as good, so you get a little bit of play sometimes in those bearings, and as a result you tend to wear out your bearings faster. So these are all negatives of their cranks and their bearing systems. Next is stiff shifting. So unlike the Shimano, which is super easy and super smooth, the SRAM shifting is a little bit stiff. So that lever that you have to press, there's a bit more pressure you have to put on it to click it down, and to send it up the stack, you are pushing the full spring weight mechanically against the rear derailleur. So if you're using a mechanical system, your fingers might get tired faster. So if you're doing like an epic 300-kilometer bike ride or something, or 200-kilometer bike ride, by the end of the bike ride, your fingers might be feeling a little bit tired. Shimano, you can click away all day, no trouble. Campy, yeah, you're probably going to have the same trouble. SRAM, it's a little bit stiff. It's not a huge problem, but it is definitely a minus for the Groupset. And then finally, for their negatives, I've got too many BBs. So SRAM use the GXP system. They use the 30mm press fit or 30mm BB30. They've got the dub system, which is 29mm. So they've really got too many BBs. That means that it's difficult if you're building your own bike to get the right bottom bracket system that you need, or if you come to replace it with an aftermarket one, it's a bit of a pain in the ass to find the latest one. And the fact that they're now switching everything over to dub means that your old bottom bracket system might be obsolete if you buy, as I say, one of the older systems. So they're a bit more of a headache than Shimano, for example. They all use the 24mm system across the board. Like whatever Groupset you buy with Shimano, it's 24mm, two bearings, 24mm. With SRAM, it's now 22 and 24, or 30 and 30, or 29 and 29. So yeah, too many BBs. Come on, SRAM, sort it out. Hopefully that they're going to just get rid of everything else and go straight to dub, which they say is the bee's knees. I've not used any dub stuff yet, so I don't know. I'm hoping that's true. Hopefully there's no issues with dub. But if they sort it out, that would be great. So there we go, that's my cons. So I've got, for positives, for SRAM, I've got 6, and for cons, I've got 4. So that gives them a score of +2. So at the end of the day, I've got 0 for Campy, 2 for Shimano, sorry, 1 for Shimano, and 2 for SRAM. So SRAM wins overall, in my opinion, for which Groupset I would probably recommend the most right now. Shimano very close second, and Campy third. So as I did for Campy, I recommended what kind of riders might prefer Campy. What kind of rider might prefer Shimano? Everyday riders, people who just want to enjoy cycling and not have anything too fussy or too expensive to worry about, people who just want easy access to cycling, and people who want easy repairs and cheap costs. Shimano is the best at that. And also people who race. Racing with Shimano is probably a good idea because it's very easy to shift, it's quiet, it's quick, it's super reliable, and if you crash and break it, it's not too expensive to replace. So yeah, Shimano wins, I think, for the racers out there. SRAM comes in a very close second for racing. It's a little bit harder to shift with, but it's not like a super big deal, and obviously they've got some advantages with regards to the lightness, so that probably cancels that issue out. So again, if you're a racer, SRAM is a great Groupset to go for. I'd also recommend SRAM for people who just love technology and want the cutting edge stuff and want a really cool Groupset, because I think they've definitely got the cool factor right now. So there you go, those are my recommendations from a bike mechanic slash bike shop owner who has ridden all of these Groupsets. I've ridden Campy, I've ridden Shimano most of my life, and I've also ridden SRAM Groupsets. Yeah, and they're all pretty cool. I wouldn't discount any of them. I'm not going to say never buy Campy, but I think there's as many cons as pros as there are to Campy. I'm sure if you're a Campy fan, you're going to disagree with me and come up with 101 reasons why I should love Campy more, but that's just me looking at it without too much bias and just saying what I would potentially recommend to a friend. I would not recommend Campy to a friend, but I would potentially recommend Shimano or SRAM. So there you go. Thank you for watching. I hope that was informative and useful for you. And as always, folks, when you're riding, stay safe. See you soon.